Can you imagine having your own father tell you to your face that you're the dumb one and that he'd make sure you stayed that way? That's what my dad did. He assigned each of us, his own children, a role at birth, a label we were never meant to escape, and he was dead serious about it. My brother Nolan, he was the smart one. Adrian, the handsome one. Mara, the strong one. And me, I was the dumb one. From the moment I struggled to breathe as the smallest baby, that was my sentence. Dad didn't just label us. He enforced these identities with an almost terrifying dedication. He called it maintaining the family ecosystem, but what he was really doing was dismantling our souls, piece by piece. My mom, she saw it. She couldn't stand to watch, so she left. She couldn't stand to watch, so she left. And Dad, twisted as he was, took her leaving as proof that his system was actually better without her around. It was a chilling start to a childhood that felt more like a prison. This wasn't some quirky family tradition. It was a brutal system of control. When Nolan struggled with a math problem, Dad would swoop in, solve it, and then turn his anger on me. He'd beat me for even trying to help, screaming that dumb children don't understand mathematics. The message was clear. Stay in your lane or suffer. When I dared to grow taller than Adrian, my father forced me to hunch constantly. Constantly. My spine actually curved because the dumb one couldn't also be tall. It was excruciating, humiliating. He yanked me out of school after third grade, claiming I was too stupid to learn. But I knew the truth. He'd panicked when I started reading above grade level. My intelligence, however small, was a threat to his carefully constructed world. My siblings suffered too in their own assigned roles. Mara wasn't allowed to cry even with broken bones. The strong one doesn't feel pain. Adrian, when he gained normal teenage weight, was subjected to extreme diets until he fainted because the handsome one had to stay lean no matter the cost. As we got older and our true talents started to emerge, Dad got worse, more desperate. When Adrian showed athletic talent, Dad, my own father, fed him pills that made his hair fall out because handsome boys aren't supposed to bulk up. He forced Mara to lift weights from 6 years old, literally destroying her joints, ensuring she'd need a cane by 20. Nolan dared to show artistic talent, and Dad's response? He burned Nolan's paintings right in front of him. Can you imagine the horror, the violation of that? But I, in my dumb category, somehow got it the worst. Why? Because intelligence was harder to destroy than looks or strength. He made me take pills that left me dizzy and confused, telling everyone they were for a severe learning disability that I absolutely did not have. He was poisoning me, slowly, methodically. We were prisoners, but we were also survivors. My siblings and I formed a silent, desperate alliance. Nolan would secretly teach me from his textbooks after midnight, risking Dad's rage if we were caught. Adrian, with incredible bravery, would steal my pills and swap them with vitamins whenever he could. Mara, though forced to be Dad's enforcer, would pretend to chase me away from her weights, but in reality, she'd help me exercise. We developed a secret language, whispered words, coded glances, a lifeline between us, hiding in plain sight from the monster we lived with. Our first attempt at escape came when I was 15. Mara had saved what little money she could from odd jobs, and we planned to run away together. But Dad had trackers in our phones. He caught us at the train station. His punishment was brutal, a terrifying escalation. Mara was forced to carry 100-pound bags until her back gave out. Nolan had to solve equations for 16 hours straight until he collapsed. Adrian had to stare in mirrors listing his flaws for days. And me? I had to write, "I'm too stupid to think for myself," 10,000 times. 10,000 times. After that, he moved us to an isolated farmhouse, cut us off from the world, and told everyone we'd died in a fire. We were truly gone. Erased. 3 years later, I found a flicker of hope. I discovered online courses and started secretly studying, poring over lessons while Dad thought I was just looking at picture books. My siblings, God bless them, created elaborate distractions so I could learn. Nolan would fake academic crises that needed Dad's full, brilliant attention. Adrian would conjure grooming emergencies that took hours to fix. Mara would pretend to hurt herself in ways that demanded Dad's constant care. Thanks to them, to their sacrifice, I finished my GED and applied to colleges using a library computer, a tiny act of rebellion that felt like a scream into the void. When my acceptance letter from State University showed up at our P.O. box, Mara grabbed it. We all huddled together in the barn, silent tears streaming down our faces. It was real. We planned my escape for months with military precision. The night I left, Nolan faked a seizure, claiming to have overtaxed his brilliant mind. Adrian, in a desperate, gut-wrenching act, smashed a mirror and threatened to destroy his own face. Amidst the chaos, Mara smuggled me out in her truck and drove me to campus. For one glorious, amazing week, I lived in a dorm. I went to classes like a normal person. I picked my own clothes. I talked in class. I made friends who knew me simply as me, not a label. Then the phone rang. It was Dad. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" he said, his voice eerily calm. My blood ran cold. "The school called about your medical records. I've already withdrawn you. Mara's bringing you home." I turned around, and there she was. Mara standing in my doorway, looking sick with guilt. Behind her, Dad holding a medical bag. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. He'd threatened to blind Adrian and break Nolan's hands. My father, with a chilling smile, prepared a syringe. "You've upset the whole ecosystem by trying to be smart," he purred, walking toward me. "We need to fix that overactive brain permanently." He mentioned a Dr. Howard who did special procedures targeting specific parts of the brain. As Mara grabbed my arms and Dad raised that needle, he said words that still echo in my nightmares. "Don't worry, son. You won't even remember wanting to be anything but dumb once we're done scooping out the problem areas." The needle moved toward my skin. I watched the clear liquid inside, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Mara's grip tightened, trapping me. The metal point touched my arm. That's when the banging started, loud enough to shake the entire dorm door frame. Dad jerked the needle back, shoving it into his bag just as the door flew open. Campus security officer Dominic Reyes rushed in, hand on his radio. He found us frozen, Mara still pinning my arms, Dad zipping up his medical bag trying to look normal. Reyes stepped between us, pulling Mara's hands off me, and then moved me behind him, away from them. My whole body shook uncontrollably, my teeth chattering like I was freezing. Dad, ever the manipulator, started talking in his calm, doctor-like voice about my mental health, how I was having episodes, making up stories. But Reyes wasn't fooled. He saw the red marks on my arms, then his eyes landed on Dad's medical bag. I tried to speak, but my voice came out broken, weird from the shaking. Reyes asked what was in the bag. Between chattering teeth, I managed one word: syringe. Dad tried to dismiss it, just medication for his condition, but Reyes wasn't buying it. He called for backup, blocking the doorway. Dad tried to push past, but Reyes held firm. 2 more guards arrived, and Reyes told them to watch Dad and Mara while he talked to me. The words tumbled out the needle, the threatened lobotomy, the pills, the abuse, all mixed up and panicked. Reyes's face went from concern to horrified. He called for an ambulance. Dad kept trying to interrupt, to explain, but Reyes shut him down. The ambulance arrived, and the EMTs found the tiny red mark where the needle had touched me. They loaded me in while Reyes told Dad and Mara they needed to come to the station for questioning. At the emergency room, Dr. Yusef Adami examined the injection site, took pictures, measured the marks on my arms. He ordered blood tests immediately. The nurse drew what felt like 20 tubes of blood while Dr. Adami asked me questions. I told him everything: the pills, the dizziness, the confusion, the fake learning disability. His face grew more worried. He ordered more tests, including hair samples that could show drug exposure going back months. They took urine samples, mouth swabs. Dr. Adami promised they'd run every test possible to find out what my father had been giving me. I spent the whole night in the hospital getting tests and brain scans. The next morning, a woman named Marisol Quinn, a case manager from the university, came to see me. She explained that Dad had used forged documents claiming severe cognitive impairment to withdraw me. Marisol helped me put a privacy block on my records, started paperwork for a no-contact order, and assured me campus security had Dad's picture. I texted my siblings our old code word, "Are you okay?" Adrian texted back. Dad was home, screaming. He was already on the phone with lawyers trying to file for guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent. He was even calling doctors, desperately trying to get someone to sign papers about my supposed disability. It was a terrifying thought. He wouldn't stop. Marisol called someone from legal, and within an hour, an attorney named Priya Anand showed up. She was sharp, taking notes on everything. We needed to document everything to fight the guardianship. She had me write down every detail about the pills, the abuse, the times Dad had hurt us for being good at the wrong things. Priya said my college acceptance and grades would be crucial proof that I wasn't impaired. Detective Renee Salas came that afternoon to take my official statement, going through everything step by step. She asked about the long-term pattern of abuse the roles Dad assigned us. I remembered something: the birth certificates. Mara had mentioned once that Dad had written our assigned roles on them. Detective Salas wrote it down, promising to look into getting copies. The next 2 days were a blur. I pulled together my hidden GED certificate, printed my college acceptance letter, screenshots of every text my siblings had sent about Dad's actions. Priya sat with me in the hospital cafeteria, sorting it all, organizing it into folders: educational competence, pattern of abuse, medical evidence. She kept shaking her head at the messages, especially Adrian's descriptions of forced vomiting, or Nolan pretending he couldn't understand basic concepts. The financial aid office even called. My funding was frozen because Dad had contacted them claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage money. Marisol handled it, filing dependency override paperwork, explaining the police report to the financial aid director. He promised to expedite it, but it would take weeks. That afternoon, Dad started sending emails to my school account. Long, rambling messages about me, destroying the family ecosystem, how the dumb one accepting their place was essential for everyone's well-being. He wrote about how Nolan's intelligence would suffer without my contrast, how Adrian's looks meant nothing if everyone was equal, how Mara's strength came from protecting the weak one. Priya told me to save every single one, not to respond. Perfect evidence, she called them, of his abusive mindset. I forwarded them all but tried not to read them too closely. They made my hands shake. 3 days later, Dr. Adami called with the blood test results. His voice was careful, explaining they'd found traces of sedatives in my system, consistent with long-term exposure, a type used for severe anxiety, but which would cause confusion and cognitive impairment in someone who didn't need them. He was ordering hair follicle testing that could show exposure going back months, even years. This, he said, could be crucial for criminal charges against Dad for poisoning or assault. That same evening, Mara called, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. She kept apologizing, saying Dad was making her choose, help him bring me home, or he'd hurt Adrian and Nolan worse than ever. Her voice cracked as she told me he'd hired someone, some guy who finds people who don't want to be found, and this person was tracking my location. I could hear Dad in the background telling her to stop being weak, that the strong one doesn't cry over necessary discipline. Detective Salas scheduled a meeting for the next day. Between the assault attempt in my dorm, the stalking with the tracker, and the documented pattern of abuse, we had enough for a temporary protective order. We met at the station, and I filled out more forms describing every incident, every threat, every moment of control. 3 days later, at the courthouse for the temporary restraining order hearing, Dad showed up, perfectly put together in a navy suit, his hair combed back. He told the judge in a calm, reasonable voice that I was delusional, that I had always had mental problems. But then the judge looked at the medical evidence from Dr. Adami, read Dad's ecosystem emails, saw the photos Reyes had taken of the marks on my arms. His face got harder and harder. He granted a 2-week temporary restraining order, warning Dad that any contact would result in arrest. Within hours, Dad started using other people to contact me. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years messaged me about breaking Dad's heart. Old family friends called the dorm phone to tell me I was selfish, destroying my family. Priya documented every single contact as a violation of the spirit, if not the letter of the order. Then, someone posted my dorm address online, on some forum, claiming I was a dangerous mentally ill person who'd abandoned my poor father after years of sacrifice. Campus IT helped me document the doxing, tracing IP addresses, while security increased patrols. The university issued an official no trespass order against Dad. Officer Reyes personally delivered it to the farmhouse, warning him that any appearance on campus would mean immediate arrest. 2 days later, I found a small package in my mailbox, a thumb drive with a sticky note in Mara's handwriting, evidence. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop, scanned copies of all 4 of our birth certificates. My heart hammered as I saw what Dad had written on each one, right there in the official boxes for medical conditions. Nolan, smart one, exceptional cognitive function. Adrian, handsome one, aesthetic priority. Mara, strong one, physical dominance required. And mine, dumb one, severely limited capacity. He had literally put these labels on our legal documents like they were real medical diagnoses. I printed copies and ran to Priya's office, coatless, breathless. She took one look and her face went white. "This is premeditated abuse," she said, "documented from birth. I've never seen anything this clear in 20 years of practice. This," she declared, "would be the centerpiece of our permanent restraining order hearing." That same afternoon, a text from Adrian using our old code. When I translated it, my stomach dropped. He'd fainted at the farmhouse. Dad had taken him to urgent care. The doctor there noticed he was severely underweight. Dad, of course, blamed stress from his troubled brother. Adrian said the doctor looked suspicious but didn't push it. I texted Adrian back asking if he could get copies of those medical records. He was scared but said he'd try. Dad's treatment was getting worse every day. The next morning, Detective Salas called with unexpected news. A neighbor near the farmhouse had seen news coverage and contacted the police. She'd heard strange screaming for years, seen medical supply trucks too often. She'd always wondered, but Dad had told everyone we were homeschooled special needs children requiring constant medical care. Salas was adding the neighbor's statement to the growing pile of evidence. Priya decided it was time to go after Dr. Darktir Howard. She filed a formal complaint with the state medical board about his involvement in Dad's lobotomy threats. Even if he hadn't actually done it yet, just planning such a procedure on a healthy person violated every ethical standard. The medical board opened an investigation, subpoenaing his patient records. 3 days later, Priya called with bad news. Dad had filed for emergency guardianship over me, claiming I was profoundly impaired and a danger to myself. The court scheduled an evaluation. Priya fought hard and got an independent evaluator assigned. She coached me on what to expect. Just be yourself. Answer honestly. The evaluation took place in a small courthouse office. The evaluator was kind but thorough. I spent 3 hours answering questions, doing cognitive tests, explaining my education, describing the abuse. When I showed her my GED certificate and college acceptance letter, she looked genuinely shocked. "Your father claims you have the mental capacity of a young child," she said carefully. I showed her the birth certificate, Dad's handwriting. She took detailed notes. Marisol had been working on getting me mental health support. She connected me with a support group for survivors of family abuse. The first meeting was hard, but hearing other people's stories made me feel less alone, less crazy. That night, Mara texted me something that made me cry. She'd gone to a clinic and gotten x-rays of her joints. The images showed severe damage from being forced to lift heavy weights since she was 6. Her knees, shoulders, spine all showed signs of repetitive stress injuries that would probably need surgery. She said seeing the actual damage in black and white was breaking through years of Dad's programming. She was finally getting angry at what he'd done to her body, all in the name of making her the strong one. She was thinking about giving a statement to the police, but she was still scared about Nolan. Detective Salas called me 2 days later about getting a search warrant for Dr. Howard's office. She explained the process was slow. He hadn't done anything illegal yet. Being threatened as a tool for Dad wasn't enough for most judges. She needed more evidence of actual intent. I understood, but it was frustrating. The whole legal system seemed designed to wait until after crimes happened. That same afternoon, back at my dorm, I found something weird. A folded piece of paper pushed under my door. My hand shook as I opened it. "Dumb boys who run away get hurt." Dad's handwriting. I called campus security. Officer Reyes collected the note as evidence. Security reviewed camera footage, but whoever left it had avoided them all. They knew the blind spots. Reyes increased patrols, suggested I vary my routes. The next morning, my backpack felt heavier than usual. I dumped everything out. That's when I found it, sewn into the lining at the bottom. Someone had cut open the fabric, inserted a small GPS tracker, and sewn it back up. The stitching was neat, almost invisible. Detective Salas collected it, adding stalking charges to the growing list against Dad. The tracker was expensive. It had probably been transmitting my location for days. Later that week, some good news. The registrar's office agreed to let me re-enroll provisionally for 2 classes while all the legal stuff sorted out. It wasn't a full course load, but having some normal routine helped me feel grounded. My professors were understanding. They offered extensions when I had court dates or police meetings. But balancing coursework with everything else was overwhelming. Some days I'd go straight from a police interview to class, then to a meeting with Priya. My brain felt pulled in too many directions. The support group helped, but I still felt like I was drowning sometimes. 3 weeks after the evaluation, we finally got the decision about Dad's emergency guardianship petition. The evaluator's report was clear and direct about my complete competence. The judge denied Dad's petition and seemed genuinely concerned by all the evidence. He scheduled a full hearing for a permanent restraining order and asked Detective Salas to keep investigating. Dad didn't take the denial well. Nolan sent me a scared text using our code. Dad had told him that if he testified, he'd destroy Nolan's hands so he could never write or type again. Nolan was thinking about running away, but didn't know where to go. He'd never been allowed to have a job or learn basic life skills. I immediately told Priya and Detective Salas about the threat. They connected us with a social worker, Carmen Vale, who specialized in helping abuse victims escape safely. Carmen started working with my siblings to plan safe exits. The hard part was overcoming years of psychological control. Dad had convinced them they couldn't survive without him, even while he was destroying them. 2 days later, I got a call that made me cry with relief and worry. Adrian had finally escaped to a shelter. Dad had discovered Adrian's hidden phone, screaming about betrayal. Adrian grabbed a bag of clothes and ran out while Dad was destroying the phone. He called me from the shelter, crying, but also sounding relieved for the first time in years. He couldn't take the forced starvation anymore. The shelter was keeping his location secret and helping him get medical attention. Within hours, Dad had called the police to report Adrian as a kidnapped runaway, claiming I'd brainwashed him. Detective Salas quickly confirmed Adrian was an adult who had left voluntarily. The false report added another mark to Dad's pattern of harassment. Every lie he told, Salas said, just made our case stronger. He was destroying his own credibility. Meanwhile, Adrian was finally eating regular meals without someone monitoring every bite. He wanted to be strong enough to testify. Price started putting together a civil harassment claim based on all the online stuff Dad had been doing. Screenshots of posts calling me mentally ill, documenting every fake account he'd made, tracking the original doxing posts that had my dorm address. He'd posted on parent forums saying I was a runaway with severe brain damage, created fake missing person flyers, even made a website called Help Bring Eli Home, full of made-up stories about my supposed disabilities. Priya explained that having both criminal and civil cases would create multiple ways to stop Dad's behavior. While she worked on that, Dr. Adami called with the hair analysis results. I could hear the shock in his voice. The test showed I'd been exposed to sedatives consistently for at least 4 years, with levels suggesting deliberate drugging, not medical treatment. The concentration patterns showed the drugging started around age 14, continuing until I escaped, with the highest levels in the past year. Dr. Adami said he'd never seen anything like it outside of criminal poisoning cases and was preparing a detailed report. That same afternoon, a letter arrived from Dr. Tom Howard's office, claiming no record of planned procedures for me, denying discussions with my father. But Priya noticed the careful wording that avoided saying he'd never talked to Dad. It mentioned no formal consultations and no scheduled appointments, along with their commitment to appropriate medical ethics 3 times. Priya said it reeked of guilt. Detective Salas came up with an idea to get more evidence. She had me call Dr. Howard's office, recording everything. I asked general questions about house calls or private procedures. Dr. Howard himself got on the phone. He didn't admit to anything specific about me, but he mentioned that his practice sometimes handled difficult cases requiring discretion and private procedures for families with special circumstances. Enough, Salas said, to investigate his medical license and subpoena his records. A few days later, Adrian managed to get copies of his urgent care records while Dad thought he was at a grooming appointment. The documents listed him as severely underweight, noting the doctor's concern about possible malnutrition, but also recorded Dad's explanation blaming me. Priya said it was perfect. It proved Adrian's condition was real while exposing Dad's exact lie. She added them to the medical evidence folder. That same week, the medical board confirmed they had formally opened an investigation into Dr. Howard and requested his complete patient files going back 10 years. Priya explained that once a licensing board starts pulling records, doctors usually start talking to protect themselves. How Aaron might end up being our best witness against Dad without ever meaning to be. I started sleeping a little better, knowing the people who could have hurt us were finally the ones being watched. 2 days later, Mara called me crying. She'd torn something in her knee during one of Dad's forced training sessions, carrying 200 pounds up and down stairs for 3 hours straight. The doctor said she needed surgery. She'd be on crutches for at least 2 months, meaning she physically couldn't do Dad's crazy strength exercises anymore. She told me the injury was almost a relief, An excuse to stop being Dad's enforcer. I could hear the pain in her voice, physical and from years of joint damage. Carmen had been working with her to arrange transportation to a shelter, setting up a whole escape plan during one of her physical therapy appointments. But Mara kept hesitating, terrified about Nolan. She couldn't abandon him. Carmen had to keep reminding her that she couldn't protect anyone if Dad completely destroyed her ability to walk. A week later, I was walking to class when I saw someone in a big coat and sunglasses following me across campus. Even with the disguise, I recognized Dad's walk instantly. I texted Officer Reyes, kept walking toward campus security. Dad got closer, hand reaching into his bag. Reyes intercepted him right outside the library. When Dad tried to claim he was just a concerned parent, Reyes reminded him about the no trespass order and called for backup. Watching Reyes put handcuffs on Dad while he screamed about his parental rights felt like something out of a dream. After all these years of complete control, Dad was charged with criminal trespass and violating a restraining order. The prosecutor said this arrest would help our case significantly, showing he couldn't respect legal boundaries. 3 weeks later, at the permanent restraining order hearing, the neighbor from the farmhouse testified about the screaming, the medical supply trucks. She described finding me once, at 15, stumbling around confused in her yard because the pills Dad gave me had made me so dizzy. Dad had dragged me home, claiming I was severely disabled and prone to wandering. Combined with all our other evidence, the birth certificates, the drugging evidence, Dad's repeated violations, the judge looked more and more disturbed. He granted a 3-year restraining order with terms so strict Dad couldn't contact us directly or through third parties, couldn't come within 500 feet of us, and couldn't post about us online. Dad's lawyer argued it was excessive, but the judge said the pattern of abuse and recent violations showed a serious ongoing threat. Within days, Dad filed a defamation lawsuit. He claimed I was lying, destroying his reputation, seeking damages for emotional distress, demanding I publicly recant my delusions about being drugged. Priya just laughed. She immediately started preparing an anti-slap motion. This kind of retaliation, she explained, was common from abusers trying to silence victims through legal intimidation. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed when the judge ruled on Priya's motion. I watched Dad's face turn red as the judge declared the lawsuit was clearly meant to silence me from speaking about my abuse experiences. He ordered Dad to pay all my legal fees within 30 days and warned that any future lawsuits would be seen as harassment. Dad's lawyer argued about protecting a father's reputation, but the judge wasn't buying it. Outside the courtroom, Priya told me the civil harassment case was moving forward separately, and she'd already gotten a hold placed on Dad's assets so he couldn't move money around. Abusers like him count on victims running out of energy before the system runs out of patience, she said. The best thing we can do is simply refuse to disappear. For the first time, I started to believe we might actually outlast him. Detective Salas called that same afternoon. She finally got approval for a search warrant, based on everything we'd given her, plus the neighbor's testimony and new information from other families who dealt with Dr. Howard. She warned me they'd be searching the farmhouse the next morning, looking for medical supplies, drugs, and documentation of Dad's ecosystem. I told her about the filing cabinet in Dad's bedroom, where he kept all our development charts tracking how well we stayed in our assigned roles, and the locked box under his bed, where he stored the pills. The search team found way more than even I expected. Detailed notebooks dating back to our births where Dad had written daily observations on how to keep us in our roles. Bottles of prescription sedatives with no patient names. 17 different tracking devices he'd been planning to use. Printed emails between Dad and Dr. Howard discussing cognitive adjustment procedures for problem children and receipts for medical equipment that had no legitimate use in a regular home. The evidence room photos Detective Salas showed me later made my stomach churn. Seeing it all laid out on tables with evidence tags, especially the syringes and vials Dad had been collecting for whatever he'd been planning next, Detective Salas let me look through copies of the development charts a few days later. Reading them was worse than anything I'd imagined. Dad had kept a separate file for each of us, with columns tracking our height, weight, grades, and what he called role deviation incidents marked in red ink whenever one of us showed a talent that didn't match our label. My file went back to when I was 4 years old, with an entry, subject demonstrated unauthorized reading ability. Corrective measures applied. Next to it, Dad had written the dose of the pills he'd started giving me, and a note to increase it if the behavior continued. There were charts for Nolan, logging every time he'd hidden a book, charts for Adrian listing his weight to the ounce, charts for Mara, recording how much she could lift each month, like she was livestock he was raising for a purpose. Salas said the notebooks alone were enough to prove Dad had been planning and adjusting the abuse with the cold precision of a science experiment for our entire lives. I asked if I could have a copy of my own chart. When she asked why, I told her I wanted to remember that none of it had ever been about me being slow. It had been about him being afraid of what I might become. Within hours of the search, Dad was arrested at his motel for assault, stalking, and child endangerment. Detective Salas said Dr. Trial Howren was also under investigation. They discovered he'd been doing these special procedures on other families too. Dad's mugshot showed him still trying to look composed, but you could see the rage in his eyes. His perfect system was finally being exposed to everyone. The day after the arrest, the prosecutor's office called. They were taking the case to a grand jury and expected to add charges for each of my siblings once their statements were processed. Detective Salas said 2 other families had dealt with Dr. Colv. Howren had agreed to cooperate, and one of them had a child Dad's notebooks actually referenced by name, suggesting Dad and Howren had been comparing methods like colleagues. The thought that there were other parents out there running their own versions of the ecosystem made me sick. But Priya said our case had become the thread that pulled the whole thing apart. News crews started parking outside the courthouse. A reporter asked me for a comment as I left a hearing, but I just kept walking, like Priya told me to. That night, 3 more people from the support group messaged me to say they'd seen the story, and that watching someone actually win against a parent like that gave them hope they hadn't felt in years. Mara was brought in for questioning the next day about her role in bringing me back from campus. I felt sick knowing she might get in trouble for something Dad forced her to do. The detective who interviewed her called me afterward, saying they weren't pressing charges. It was clear Mara was also a victim, threatened and manipulated. That seemed to help her finally start accepting that what Dad did to all of us was abuse. Adrian went to the police station that week to give a sworn statement about the diet pills and forced starvation, showing them photos from when he was at his thinnest, and medical records from multiple fainting episodes Dad had ignored. Nolan sent in a written declaration with photos of his burned paintings and detailed descriptions of the punishments he got for showing any artistic talent, plus witness statements from 2 former neighbors who'd seen the smoke from Dad burning his art. Their courage in speaking up made the case so much stronger. The prosecutor said having all 4 siblings confirming the abuse pattern made it nearly impossible for Dad to claim this was just one troubled child making things up. Dad posted bail 3 days later and immediately started showing up at the courthouse during my hearings for the restraining order appeals, standing exactly 501 feet away. Technically outside the order, but clearly meant to scare me. Each time he appeared, campus security or court officers documented it with photos and measurements, building more evidence that he couldn't respect boundaries, even when facing serious criminal charges. The trauma started hitting me hard once the immediate danger passed. I found myself jumping whenever someone walked behind me, unable to sleep because every sound made me think Dad had found a way around the restraining order. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in full panic, thinking I heard his voice or smelt the medicine from those pills he used to force down my throat, even though logically I knew he couldn't get near me. Marisol helped me get on the waiting list for trauma therapy through the University Counseling Center, but they said it could be weeks. She also connected me with an online support group, which helped just knowing other people understood what it was like to be afraid of your own father. Prosecutor Hollis Grant called a meeting with me and Priya to discuss a plea deal he was considering offering Dad. He'd plead guilty to assault and stalking in exchange for dropping the more serious charges. He explained that trials are incredibly hard on victims, having to testify and relive everything. This deal would guarantee probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment, plus a long-term no-contact order with all of us. 3 years probation, where any violation meant immediate jail time. Mandatory therapy twice a week, paid for by him. A 10-year restraining order covering all 4 of us kids, no exceptions for holidays or family events. I called my siblings that night and we talked for hours. Mara just wanted it over. Adrian worried Dad would find a way around any restrictions. Nolan thought the therapy might actually help Dad understand what he'd done. We finally agreed that our safety mattered more than seeing Dad get the maximum punishment, and that a guaranteed outcome was better than risking a trial where something could go wrong. 2 days later, we all sent letters to the prosecutors supporting the plea deal. Dad pleaded guilty in court to assault and stalking. The judge made sure he understood he was agreeing to stay away from all of us for a decade. The news about Dr. Howren came through Detective Salas. After our case made the local news, 3 other families had contacted the medical board about him, suggesting weird treatments for their kids. The board suspended his license right away. Salah said he'd probably never practice medicine again. Dad had lost his main medical person, the one who would have actually done those horrible things he threatened. The registrar reinstated my full financial aid the same week the dependency override cleared. I registered for a complete course load, signing my own name on every form without a single person above me to approve it. Walking to my morning English class that first day, I realized I wasn't checking behind me every few steps or planning escape routes. The sun felt warm on my face. Other students rushed past me to get to their classes, and I was just another college kid heading to learn something new. I sat in the front row and raised my hand to answer a question about the reading without worrying that being smart would get me hurt. The professor smiled when I gave my answer and said I'd made an excellent point, which would have earned me a beating at home. But here, it just meant I understood the material. The dumb one, sitting in the front row of a university lecture, getting it right, going by a name instead of a label, with a future the man who raised me swore I would never be allowed to have. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to fight so hard for your own identity? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.